Imagine a king so powerful, no one dared to speak against him. His crown was heavy with gold, and his voice made even the bravest knights tremble. He ruled from a black stone castle where laughter was rare and fear filled every hall. At every meal, grand plates of meat, bread, and fruit were placed before him. But day by day, his appetite changed. No food made him happy, no flavor pleased his tongue. He pushed away roasted boars, golden pies, and sweet wines. He was still hungry for something else. Then the servants began to vanish. One by one, they disappeared without a sound. First a young boy from the stables, then a maid from the laundry, then an old cook who had served for years. The castle guards gave no answers. The king stayed silent, but every time someone went missing, the king smiled at dinner again. Behind the thick walls of the kitchen, behind locked doors, something terrifying was happening. People began to whisper, "He's eating them." But in Redstone, whispers could get you killed. This is not just a story of fear. It is the true tale of a king whose hunger turned into horror, a hunger so dark it became a legend no one wanted to remember, because when a king becomes a monster, no one is safe. Far away from the lands of sunshine and laughter, there was a kingdom called Redstone. It was always cold there. The sky stayed gray, the wind was sharp, and the streets were made of dark, cracked stones. People spoke in low voices. They walked quickly, with their heads down, as if they were always afraid of something. At the heart of Redstone stood a giant black castle. Its walls were tall and strong, and its windows looked like eyes watching the town below. This was the home of King Aldrich, also called the Iron-Jawed. No one knew if that was just his name, or if he really had something made of iron in his mouth. But one thing was certain, he was feared. The people said he could crush a man's will with just a look. His soldiers never smiled, and his guards were trained to listen, not speak. Inside the castle, no music played, no children laughed. The king didn't allow noise. He liked silence and control. People in Redstone didn't dream. They worked, obeyed, and tried to stay out of sight. Farmers brought food to the castle gate and left without waiting for thanks. Tailors stitched royal robes with shaking hands, and the servants, they never dared speak unless spoken to. This was not a kingdom of kindness. It was a kingdom of power and fear, ruled by a man who had everything except satisfaction. At first, King Aldrich ate like any other ruler. His table was filled with the finest foods in the land: roasted goose, golden cheese, honey-glazed fruits, and bread as soft as clouds. Chefs from distant lands were brought in just to prepare his meals. But slowly, things began to change. The king started pushing his plates away. He would take one bite, then frown, 2 bites, then stop. His eyes would grow colder each day. "This is nothing," he once growled, throwing an entire roast to the floor. The servants froze, afraid to even breathe. The chefs tried everything: rare spices, meats from exotic animals, fish caught from far-off oceans. Still, the king sat in silence, chewing slowly, staring at nothing. One night, he whispered something that chilled the head cook to the bone. "Bring me something different." No one understood what he meant, but the servants noticed something even stranger. The king was growing restless. He no longer smiled. His hands trembled during meals. His eyes followed people, not with anger, but with hunger. Something had shifted inside King Aldrich. It was as if normal food no longer pleased him. He wanted something new, something darker. And then, one day, a servant went missing. The king ate well that night, and for the first time in weeks, he smiled. It began quietly, like a whisper in the dark. One morning, Lyle, a young servant boy who cleaned the king's boots, didn't show up. The other servants thought he overslept. They searched his tiny room, but his bed was still made, and his clothes were untouched. He had simply vanished. The next day, Bram, the old man who lit the castle's torches at night, was gone too. He had worked in the castle for over 30 years. No one could believe he'd leave without saying a word. The guard said they ran away. Maybe they were thieves. But the servants knew Bram couldn't even run. But something else changed too. The king, who had barely touched his meals for weeks, began to eat again, slowly at first, then with deep, hungry bites. Every night after someone went missing, the king's plate would be clean. The sound of chewing echoed through the silent halls. He never said a word about the disappearances, but his eyes told a story, calm, cold, and full. He was no longer starving, he was feeding, and everyone who worked in the castle began to wonder. Behind the grand dining hall, past thick iron doors and stone corridors, there was a place few people had ever seen, the secret kitchen. It wasn't marked on any map of the castle. Even most servants didn't know it existed. Only a handful of people were allowed inside. The king's private chef, 2 guards, and a man with no name, only called the butcher. This kitchen was not like the others. It was cold, dark, and smelled strange, not like spices or cooked food. The scent was heavier, like metal and wet cloth. Knives hung on the walls, not for chopping vegetables, but for something else. The stone floor was stained, and strange chains were bolted to the far wall. It was here the truth lived. The whispers in the castle halls were real. This was where the king's hunger was fed. At night, the guards would drag in a servant who had made a mistake, but no one ever saw them come back out. No screams, no cries, just silence. And then, the next day, the king's appetite would return, sharper, hungrier, and more satisfied than ever before. The kitchen staff never spoke of it. They kept their eyes low and their hands busy. They knew the price of asking questions. One cook once asked where the meat came from. He disappeared the next day. The king's meals were fresh, too fresh, and the walls of the secret kitchen remembered everything. Soon, the castle changed. People no longer looked one another in the eye. Servants walked faster, never turning their backs near the dining hall. The kitchen staff stopped talking completely. Only silence and fear lived in the stone hallways of Redstone now. At night, low whispers echoed behind locked doors. "He eats them. No one leaves. Once they're called to the king. I heard him chew, and it wasn't meat." The stories grew darker. One maid swore she saw a foot, a human foot, being carried into the secret kitchen under a cloth. A guard admitted he once heard. To survive, the people of Redstone learned one rule: never ask questions, never get noticed. Because if the king looked your way for too long, you might be dinner. In the middle of all the fear, one man stood tall, Thomas, a young messenger with sharp eyes and a quiet heart. He had grown up in the castle, delivering letters between the royal rooms. No one ever noticed him. That made it easier for him to see everything. Thomas noticed the missing servants. He counted the quiet dinners. He watched how the guards avoided the secret kitchen like a curse. And he saw something else, too. The king's smile. It wasn't joy. It was hunger. He couldn't keep silent anymore. One night, Thomas slipped out of the castle gates. He knew secret paths, old stone tunnels made by workers long ago. He ran through forests and climbed rocky hills, his boots soaked in mud, his hands shaking. His goal? To reach the Council of Elders, wise rulers from nearby kingdoms who still cared about justice. But running from Redstone wasn't easy. The king had spies everywhere, and the forests were filled with strange sounds. Still, Thomas didn't stop. He carried the truth in a small letter pressed against his chest, a truth that could bring down a king. If he made it, someone might finally stop the horror. If he failed, the king would keep eating, and Redstone would be lost forever, swallowed whole by the appetite of one man. Days passed, then weeks. Many in the castle believed Thomas had failed, caught, eaten, forgotten like the rest. But far beyond Redstone's walls, his letter reached the right hands. The Council of Elders read his message with shaking hands. The words were short, but powerful. He eats them. He feeds on his own. Stop him before none are left. Shocked and furious, the council sent their best spies to Redstone. These weren't loud men in armor. They were silent watchers who blended into shadows. They came as traders, painters, and monks, and what they found was worse than they imagined. The king's diet had indeed changed. People had vanished. Records were erased. The secret kitchen existed and smelled of blood. The walls were thick, the screams hidden, but the truth was everywhere. A final report was sent to the council, and this time they acted fast. A letter was the night the council army reached Redstone. The sky was black, not a single star. The wind howled like wolves, and torches flickered as if afraid of what was coming. The king sat in his great hall, chewing slowly. Another meal, another servant who didn't return. His crown rested on the table beside his bloody hands. He didn't hear the army climbing the castle walls. He didn't notice the shadows slipping through the gate tunnels. He didn't care, but the people did. When the army stormed the gates, the servants didn't scream. They cheered. Some even joined in. The king's guards were loyal, but even they had grown afraid of what he had become. One by one, they dropped their swords. The king stood when the council's leader entered, his mouth still red, his eyes wild. "You have no power here," he hissed. The leader raised his hand. "Not anymore." They found the secret kitchen. They found the bones. They found the truth. King Aldrich tried to run. He roared. He fought, but the people had seen too much. His crown was crushed underfoot, his throne torn down. By sunrise, Redstone had fallen, and the iron-jawed king was no more. But no one sang songs. No one danced, because the horror would never be forgotten. The king who ate his servants had finally been stopped, but the castle walls still whispered his name, and the kitchen was never used again. After the fall of King Aldrich, Redstone was quiet. The castle stood still, cold, empty, and covered in shadows. No one dared sit on the throne again. The crown was melted down, and the secret kitchen was sealed behind stone walls. But even now, people say if you walk near that part of the castle, you can still hear the sound of chewing. The council placed a new leader, one chosen by the people, kind, fair, and humble. But the scars of Aldrich's reign were deep. Families who lost loved ones never got answers, only silence. Graves were made, but no bodies were buried. Tomas, the brave messenger, was honored as a hero. A statue of him now stands at the castle gate, not with a sword, but holding a letter. The letter that changed everything. For generations, parents told their children the story of the iron-jawed king, not to scare them, but to remind them that power without mercy is a monster. And every year, on the darkest night of winter, candles are lit in Redstone. One for each servant who disappeared, one for each life taken by hunger, and one